Mhm. Gotta find my YouTube button on my phone now.
We go.
Not that I follow along anyway with this damn thing. So
All right, here's the comments. Change that to live chat. One person's watching.
I'm not even notified we're on live. We still do YouTube,
No.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, YouTube's really weird. That's like there was one person that was like, can you guys like post this more or send out an email? And I was like, no.
Well, I mean, it is what it is.
I mean, I get it, but like I cannot control YouTube's algorithm with when it chooses to notify. Although some are saying YouTube is suppressing history, which I don't quite buy that, but
I don't know what that is, but yeah, well, I have no idea if we're on or not, so I'll
no,
just
we
follow
are.
along. Oh, it just I went on YouTube and it doesn't show, so whatever.
No, we are. No, you have to like go right to the channel. Like it's a very
I tried
backward.
that. I tried that. I tried that. You with all the
Allie K's
answers.
on here.
Well, Allie K she's a genius and she figured this thing out. So, oh, there we go. I found it. See, I guess I'm a genius too. Then, all right. Anyway, whatever. It's hard on me for all the time. Anyway, so yeah, so this is good. Back to this again.
Yeah, it's been like a few weeks that
we haven't done a weekend one of these in a long time because we've been
no.
busy. We've been bouncing around, so it's good. You
Yeah.
know, it's
So yeah,
good
we
to.
are back here. We will be releasing another episode next week. This one is going to be about the planning and the logistics behind the March to the Sea. Estella, oh, I guess it's 5 o'clock somewhere. It is.
It's always 5 o'clock at 11th Corps headquarters, Estella. Yeah. With that here, Mary needs her eye opener in the morning.
Anyway,
no, but yeah, but it's good to get back to this because we've been since we moved down here in the end of the summertime, it feels like we've been just for our own stupid lives. We're running around going all. We had Remembrance Day weekend last week, and we had a bunch of stuff going last weekend. We had the seminary thing before that. We had guests a couple weeks. We were in Florida. We were in Virginia. Not that some world travelers a freaking thing, but it's just been busy. But hopefully now we can kind of get back to normal again. With this whole thing, and that's cool. Yeah, so whatever.
Scott says congrats on your work with the Bourne Braves. Job well done.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. That was a labor of love that I decided to finally step aside from. Been doing it for a long, long time, and so let somebody else do it. So moving down here to PA made it tough to make it back and forth to games on the Cape. So it's kind of an easy decision. But I thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. I heard from a lot of cool people over the years when I did that. So that's not that it's about baseball, but it was nice. It's nice. It was good to it was good. It was good to see. So it's good to feel. So
good. Brian's on here from England. We haven't heard from him in a while. Morning, Ryan.
Oh yeah, well we haven't been doing this for a while. It's probably why. Yeah, no, yeah. So it's definitely cool. It's definitely cool to feel like get back to this again. This was kind of a routine we did for a while, and now we're getting back to it. So it's good. We're going to record again this week, and we're going to do the march up to the March.
Yeah, the logistics behind it, which is it's interesting when you look at the planning. I was reading a bit of Robert L. O'Connell's Fierce Patriot this morning, specifically his section on the March to the Sea. And if you want a good biography to read, Fierce Patriot by Robert L. O'Connell is, even if you're not into the Civil War, I recommend it to everybody because it's so well written. Like he talks like he speaks, I think. And that makes it's not academic writing. But it's really good. He knows his stuff, and his explanation of the march is really good. Like when you think about that, like I said to you this morning, it would have been amazing to take a drone, not that they had them back then, but to see the armies and that they were like 20 miles like across like
they had drones. But for half a second you believe me, that was the best. For 1 second you went, okay.
No, but so the 4 columns that Sherman had, each of them were about 10 miles long. And then they cut, like, sometimes they would be like 20 miles apart, but then it would be like 60 miles. Like it varied. But it was
the goal was 30. That was the plan.
Yeah.
And you had, and what's interesting, I guess, historical memory, people just don't really study the march. I mean, it, it is on the overrated side, but it's an important part of history because of the way it all played itself out. But I guess the perception is, Atlanta falls, he sits around and whittles for a few months, and he goes. The reality is he wanted to go, but circumstances beyond his control, namely Hood, who kept driving west and northwest, forced him to stay because Lincoln and Grant didn't feel that it was necessary. And he did everything possible. He sent Thomas over to Nashville. He sent John Schofield there to go to intercept him and try to get them along the way. It led to the Franklin campaign, and until he finally went. And so you can just see Sherman being kind of like a whining and begging for this what he wanted to do. And Grant, it took a while.
It took some convincing because they weren't sure what Hood was going to do. And that's quite evident that even the guys with Sherman, like Howard specifically, would mention Hood to his wife. And he said one time, he wrote, he's like, we have no idea what Hood is up to. We're trying to figure it out, but we can't. And then the next letter was basically, that Hood had tried to go to Altoona or whatever it was, but he had been stopped, but he'd still been ripping up the railway tracks, but Sherman's guys were able to repair them pretty quickly.
We'll talk about this in the episode, and we got to brush up on it if we do it, but even the Battle of Allatoona Pass is important because, you have a situation where Samuel French is being told to go and wreck the trains in the depot at Allatoona Pass.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, he should have done it, but then enter the great John M. Corsmary from Pittsburgh. The last Pittsburgh guy to win anything, right? He ended up going in there and really, there's that story where they had 20 railroad cars. They jammed them full of men, kind of like the subway in the city, and raced them up to Allatoona to hold the battle and force French back. And so, but all these little battles that took place. And then the other thing that hurt Hood and kept Sherman from going was he couldn't cross the friggin' Tennessee River. Everywhere he wanted to go, it was too hard to cross. So he'd march his army, and they get to different places, Decatur, Alabama, places like that. Here's our place. Oh crap, it's too strong. Let's keep moving further west. And Sherman's like, come on. And there's that great quote Sherman has when he realizes that Hood wants to go to the Ohio River. He goes, if he wants to go to the Ohio River, I will give him the damn rations. Just go. Right? He wanted him to go because he knew the further Hood kept going away from Atlanta, and the further he had to chase, the less likelihood he was going to be able to go back. And then this poor Henry Slocum, with his 12,000 men sitting around Atlanta, who have to defend that city. There's no really to defend it against. But this whole thing was all these guys, the Union guys, they had a plan, right? I mean, this was like the Cylons or Battlestar Galactica, right? Sherman had a plan. And everything that went on was prohibiting him from doing it. And he was a mad fellow, man. I don't know if you know this.
He was
he got mad. He complained. Got mad like Katharine Hepburn. Why won't they just let me go to Savannah? That's the whole thing with him. And finally, he gets the go ahead. And when he gets the go ahead, he gets a message from Grant saying, "Go ahead, just go." It was like a one line. It was like, no, whatever. And he's like, woohoo. So he sets up his army with some dude from Maine on one of the wings, who I'm forgetting his name. And of course Slocum. But then you have this cast of characters, guys like Jefferson C. Davis, who his men could not stand because they didn't trust him because of his name.
Well, he didn't endear himself to anybody. I mean, I'm sorry, but when you murder someone and get away with it, like what he did to Bull Nelson, and you're like, hey, I'm back. Like he is like Crowley in Supernatural. Like that's how I imagine him.
Most of the men in the march were Westerners. There was some in the East guys. Francis Blair had some Eastern guys, but for the most part, it was the West. And guys from the 17th Ohio hated Davis. And there's that great story where Jefferson C. Davis had his favorite horse that he just loved, right?
Yeah.
One night, the men of the 17th Ohio shaved his tail completely clean. And Davis lost his mind. He offered a $500 reward to anybody who says who did it, and none of the men opened their mouths. That's how much they hated this guy. And so he had to ride in a horse with no tail, right? And so that's what happened with him. And so this was the dynamic. You've got people like that who they just didn't really appreciate. And so a lot of the guys were hard fighting men, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the march is like very to be on the march, you had to be in shape.
Yeah.
Like for instance, our cat Mosby, there's no way he could go on the march because he's becoming a fat little boy.
Well, I mean, you had 80,000 men. He ultimately marches 62,000
Yeah.
because they were unhealthy, they were sick, they were gravitationally challenged. You want to call it whatever you want to call it. You had to say hello to them twice in the morning, Mary, some of them, right? So they had to stay behind. So that's what happened. So you have a situation where he wants the fittest men, because if you're going to succeed on the march, it's
Yeah.
all about speed. And Lincoln and Grant and all of them said, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do it quick. Chop, chop, right?
Well, they covered on average 15 miles a day. But then you also had the like found this one really good letter, and I think it was Howard's quartermaster was writing Howard, telling him specifically what rations the men were to have, and this is just 4 days before the march. And then he said he ended the letter by saying, I've got to get the cows out to graze or else they're going to starve. Like Sherman had cows with them too, and that was going to last them, I think it was 20 days that they would have the cows would feed, like, they would be able to slaughter them, whatever, milk, whatever they were doing. But then you also had, now they were referred to as the foragers in official reports, but what would become known as the bummers. And the bummers were a group unto themselves. If you were already selected to go on the march, good for you. But if you were the type of soldier that had, basically what Sherman did is, I want the guys that, have been caught stealing stuff, are like really rambunctious. Those are the guys I need foraging. So if you were like one of these individuals who was like always goofing off, odds are you were going to be a bummer. And these guys would go out, forage, and come back. And it's
Right.
not just about the food that they were bringing back. They would tell these like stories, like they just had fun. Like they would come back dressed in women's clothing.
Oh, it was like yeah,
It was like a circus.
like the TV show MASH. And they all got
Yeah.
that's the whole thing. Is they came back and they had these little parades. They dressed up and you know from women's clothes. And they parade around. I mean,
Yeah.
the thing about it though, and the thing about Sherman, obviously, is he's the most polarizing guy in the Civil
Oh yeah.
War, right? And for some people he's a demon, some people he's a
Yep.
hero. It all depends on what whether you like sweet tea or non-sweet tea, I suppose, right? That's how you make that. But that's how the whole thing says. But the reality is, he he had specific orders of what to do, and that's the whole thing, which is interesting about it. Unlike Sheridan in the Valley, where he was, he lost his mind after the whole Meigs thing.
Yeah.
He had orders, but at the same point, you talk about the burning of Atlanta when it finally burned, and you look at some of those rules. And we're not going to talk too much about Atlanta, but he had specific rules. If first thing, they half the buildings were taken out with the bulldozer that they built.
Yeah.
Right. The second thing was when they did finally burn, it was just the industrial areas, only residential, but the fire spread. He said that any fire lit could only be started while he was there.
Yeah.
And again, and anybody who was looting or arsoning was going to be shot on sight. Now that's his orders, but at the same point, he's sitting around going, "Oh, you have to think when he was losing his mind, he didn't lose his mind to." He wasn't calling 911 to get to get the fire department down there. He's like, well, he might have been digging "Burn Baby Burn Disco Inferno." He might have been singing that at one point,
Jeez.
right? But
we didn't start the fire.
Well, he there's that. But I think at the end of the day, it started. He had the orders in place prior for plausible deniability, and then when it went, because again, you read all of his comments and his letters to Hood leading up to that moment about you started this, anything, you fired the first shot, you bring war in the country, you get what you deserve. Because when he kicked all the families out and pissed everybody off, that Sherman's different from the Sherman of the fire.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder if he's like, I'd hate to see this place burn.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So that's what's cool about history, is because you can read this. The pro Sherman people say, well, there's specific orders. What can you do? But logically speaking, a football coach, you're playing your rival, you'll tell them, run the ball, don't score up by 40. But if you score, he's not going to cry.
No.
Running up the score. That's what happens. There was a coach from my team who liked to blow teams out, always used to pretend it wasn't his fault. Same concept.
There's a couple questions here. So Estelle is wondering how many soldiers died on the march.
There wasn't too many who died actually, because
No. They were all really, no, if you were on the march, you were not sick, basically.
you basically the only Griswoldville was the only real battle, and that
Yeah.
wasn't even much of a battle. He took I mean, of course, I'm sure some people did along the way, but it wasn't many. I mean, it wasn't that long of a march, and for
No.
the most part, all they did was march.
Yeah.
So I bet you if
They only had like one cannon per 1,000 men or something like that. Like, so that meant he wasn't going to go blow shit up along the way. Oh, and actually, Geraint's got a question on here. It's about Jeff Davis was like after Appomattox saying there was 80,000 men still available. Where were they, and why didn't he use them sooner?
I think I think that's conjecture at his point. I think I know a lot of people like to embellish, okay, on different aspects of their lives. I think it's a similar concept. They had so at that point they had so many people who were running away, who were leaving, who were they there probably were 80,000 men, but probably not in armies because at that point. Army of Tennessee was destroyed for the most part. The remnants ended up going to Hardee and Joseph Johnston in the east. Lee's army was was beaten up. So you probably, if you added everyone together, maybe that's the case, but they weren't in a fighting force. You couldn't get 80,000 able men to fight. He's probably right, but as far as how many people who deserted, how many people were injured, how many invalids, I think he's trying to tell a story that the South was still strong at the end.
Yeah,
even
like
even though we surrendered, we could have kept fighting, but we had our will was there. We had all the men. I think that was a lot of conjecture on his part for the politicians afterwards. I think that's probably what that was. But
if you read about Jeff Davis post Atlanta and around the time he put Hood in charge, but then especially post Atlanta falling, like Jeff Davis went down there to talk to Hood again at some point. And I guess he was going around Georgia saying, oh, don't worry about Sherman. We're going to beat him. There's like, everything's on fire. And he's the dog saying, this is fine. That was Jeff Davis in 1864 is he's trying to like, I think he was at that point, he's either delusional or trying to get morale higher. And another comment here, Sherman was really kind with his surrender terms to Johnson. And then the US government turned around and was like, nope, not going to do that.
Yeah, the end when you study Bentonville in North Carolina, it's again Sherman is a very interesting guy because he's kind of like a lot of the girls I know, many personalities, Mary. I think he had a situation where you had the angry Sherman, you had the kind Sherman, because you look at Bentonville specifically. He could have written, Sherman was not a good tactician. He wasn't, but he knew he had he could have run right through the remains of that army, but he chose not to. And then the story when he finds out that Lincoln got shot, right? And he's the one who tells Joseph Johnston, he pulls him aside and said, we need to talk. He says, not for nothing. Lincoln's dead. He got shot.
Like,
and of course, Joseph E. Johnson does the whole Shaggy. It wasn't me. He's like, I don't think it was you guys. But if I tell my men that Lincoln was killed, he's gonna burn the earth with you people. So we have to find a way. So he tells the people, and he actually turns the Union guns on the Union Army and says, if you attack these guys, these guns are going to be used on you because we don't think it was them.
Yeah.
So this is the diplomatic Sherman here. So he's like an onion with many, many levels.
Yeah.
And that's why when you look at someone like a William T. Sherman, he's so easy to label, right, on certain things, but he's so many different things. He talks about how hard he was fighting and how hard he was, but then how generous he was to his men after the war. He says he would give his men his last cracker, and so he's complicated. Yeah. And so if you're painting with a broad brush on someone like him, you're probably going to be wrong. That's the thing.
Yeah. And that's what like Robert L. O'Connell's Fierce Patriot paints that picture exactly. That this is a guy with many layers, many personalities. He's complicated. He's an interesting figure to study. And his biography of him is divided into 3 parts. You have Sherman, kind of the soldier, Sherman, like military tactician, and then Sherman, his personal life, like how his marriage and all that, which is like a whole other study onto itself. And Estella was saying that she has a tough time wrapping her mind around like the march and all that happened on it. So I did recommend, so we're going to be talking about the logistics of that. We have an episode where we talked more about the march. That's where our little Savannah joke came from. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
But the one book to read about it is Trudeau's Southern Storm. excellent writing. Like if anybody's read Trudeau's Gettysburg, you're getting the same thing. Like it's really good writing. He uses the soldier diaries a lot. He uses them to the point where he looked at so many of them and he was able to, like in a lot of the chapters, he will give what the weather was that day. And sometimes you could have like the right column where Howard was, it would be sunny and warm. And the left column where Slocum was, you would get rain. Like the weather varied across that, whatever, 20 or like it varied. Like sometimes it was like 20, they're 20 miles apart, but they're cutting this like kind of 60-mile swath through Georgia. Oh, hey, Bill Etzcorn's on here. And Geraint's got a question too. I just want to answer this one first. Like, yes, Sherman did have a fallout with Grant post-war, and that was because of, shockingly, John Rawlins. Sherman wanted to have more control with the armies, and he and Grant had talked about that. Like, you know, post-war, Sherman was leading the armies and he wanted more control, and they came up with this plan and Grant was going to approve it. And then Sherman went to find out if it had been approved, and he's like, Grant's like, no. And Sherman's like, well, who's blocking this? Like, who's shutting this down? He's like, well, Rawlins said it's probably not a good idea. And, you know, Rawlins is dying of tuberculosis, which is sad, but they fell out after that. And Sherman got up from Grant's office and said, very well, Mr. President, good day, and left. And they never
Grant's president. Sherman has Grant's old job, commander of all armies. And I'm a little rusty on this one, but didn't they want to move the headquarters to St. Louis?
It was something, and give the armies more, give the commander more power as well. And like, you know, basically Grant shut that down because Rawlins didn't want it to happen. Rawlins had a real, I don't know, I don't like him at all. Like I can't stand John Rawlins. He's a shady character, and Grant would bend over backwards for him. Bill Etzcorn said, I have a question. How great did we look in the Remembrance Day parade?
Oh, you kill me there. Etzcorn, I'm telling you, man, we walked by, I could, there were roses being thrown at us. You know, it was a great thing. Yeah, we marched in the parade with Bill, who's on here, who runs the BMI, the Bureau of Military Information Reenactment Group, which we are happily a part of now. Mm-hmm. And so we marched in the parade, and I Remembrance Day last weekend. And I will tell you, Barry, I'm going to tell you this. My mind was imagining Rambo marching through Georgia, right? Because if you're walking down Baltimore Street, and we're towards the back, they must keep the hooligans in the back, and watching, you know, this big blue line march down the street with people cheering and yelling. It was a rush. It really, really was. So I'm glad we did that. We saw a lot of friends at the parade, but anybody who was in Gettysburg for Remembrance Day weekend and has been to that parade, you know how awesome it is. It's just Civil War. There's not the Gettysburg High School cheerleaders. It's not the mayor. It's not the, you know, it's not the Kiwanis Club of, you know, Bonneville. It's just Civil War. And so it was really, really cool. And everyone came up for it. It's up there with the Plymouth Thanksgiving Day Parade, Mary, in my mind.
Yeah, it's really, really awesome, and it's a lot of fun, and like just like, I don't know, it was great to see. I wasn't marching, but I had the first time ever wearing a uniform, which was really great. Like everybody came together and managed to throw together a uniform for me, which was awesome. And it was fun seeing, you know, everybody marching and all that, like just the different people. What was awesome too was all the women that were marching in the parade too, as you know, whether they were as soldiers or as, you know, women, right? Like
there was a lot. I mean, it was a couple of things we were joking about. I mean, it was kind of like, you know, where's Waldo finding Robert E. Lee? There's Robert E. Lee's everywhere. There he is.
Like there
was one official Robert E. Lee, and there was a couple of Lincolns. But yeah, you're right though. There was a lot of females in uniform. We saw our friend Dominish. She was there. A lot of people who were marching. We saw our friend Shanna.
Yep.
Who is everywhere now.
I know, we kept running into her.
You know, but it's great to see that, because it's I mean, as you know, Mary, and a lot of people do know, the Civil War military history is a dominated male deal, right? It just is. Yep. So it's great to see women getting involved in it, because they tell their story too. And I thought it was good. It was a good time though. It was a great weekend. Yep. Obviously the Gettys Gear event we had with Carrie and Janet Gregory over there at Gettys Gear was great. We get to hang out with our friend Jim Hessler and of course Jody. It was a lot of cool people. It was a lot of fun to do that. I mean, Remembrance Day weekend in Gettysburg is, I'm sure most people on this have been to it. If you haven't, you should definitely put on your bucket list, because it's certainly a great event. So we had some friends over and we had a good time, and no there was some shenanigans afoot, but there was nothing nothing too bad this time.
No, it was a lot of fun. The event was great. It's always great to work with Getty's Gear on stuff. They're great people over there. But it was just to see everybody in town. I think it's busier than the anniversary, which makes sense. It's nicer weather.
Oh yeah, it was probably 60 degrees, beautiful weather. I mean,
Yeah.
the anniversary in July was. Remember how hot that weekend
Oh,
was?
that was so gross.
Although the first day, July 1st,
It was
remember how
fine.
it was
Yeah.
nice. We were walking
Yeah.
around, and then it got hot. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not going to complain about being in Gettysburg, obviously, but it was still
No.
pretty. It was still pretty cool. But there's a lot of cool things going on. Now we're kind of coming into that quiet period. The town is getting dressed up for Christmas, Barry.
Yeah,
You know.
it is. Yeah, they got the Christmas tree up, which is pretty cool. I saw it yesterday when I was driving home. So it's down in the square. They're lighting it Friday night, but yeah, like it's been great to participate in the Remembrance Weekend. We did the Cedar Creek reenactment, which was really, really awesome. What else have we done? Like just a lot of stuff. We part the seminary event that we did. We had Cody Ishon, which was really, really awesome.
Yeah, Cody's a good dude. He's he's the in charge of interpretation over at the Seminary Museum,
Yeah.
and that's the other thing. I know talking Gettysburg again, but whatever. But there's been a lot of stuff going on, and he does a great job, as they all do over there, with that whole Fridays on the Ridge, all the historical stuff. There's so many cool things here, and other places too, where you can just kind of fall back and do history.
Yeah.
We saw Carrie Janney's speech the other night on Mosby.
Oh, it was so good about Mosby. Yeah, Carrie Janney, she's amazing. She's such a good speaker. But her talk about Mosby was so good. Like I really enjoyed that.
What was fascinating about that? And Mosby's a guy, the man, not the cat, Mary.
Yeah.
He's fascinating because this is a guy who really was ostracized. I mean, after the war, there were a lot of people in the North who didn't consider him a soldier, so he wasn't eligible for a pardon because he was a partisan. He was a cavalry, but he was a bushwhacker. He was one of those people in a lot of people's minds. He wanted to open a law office in Alexandria. He was told he'd be arrested on sight if he did, because of what happened at the war. And then, of course, he ultimately really jumps on board of this fighting back against a lost cause.
Yeah.
And that was obviously blasphemous for people in the South. And he became hated to the point where he wasn't even allowed in the South anymore.
No.
And he's a guy, when you look at I don't want to say the Mount Rushmore of Confederate generals, but if you're looking at like a top 10, most people are going to include Mosby in that Confederate list, right?
Yeah.
Because of how impactful he was. And he was a guy who wasn't really allowed to show his face in parts of Virginia. No. He was part of Grant's campaign for president. And he wasn't, he went against Lee too, not as bad as Longstreet did. But again, he was different because he wasn't part so much of the Republican politics.
Yeah.
You hit that yawn very well, by the way.
No,
but I'm just saying. But he hid the Republic. He didn't go on board with the Republican politics, a la Longstreet. But he went against the whole lost cause thing. Yeah, the war was about slavery, dudes. This is what we were fighting for. Remember? And people, no. And so he pissed a lot of people off with that.
Well, because he was so just in, like, his responses are, you can tell he was a really funny guy, but his responses are, you can tell he's just done with men like Jubal Early and this whole lost cause thing, which is basically like the kind of telling a different version of the events, right? Like, and it's been very, like, Janney really showed how bad that has been, like when it comes to, the history of the Civil War and all that. Richard just mentioned there's an interesting video game called Mosby's Confederacy, which in addition to the real-time cavalry battles, has you managing public support in Northern Virginia and Southern Maryland. Would be awesome to play.
Wow. Well, Mosby's somebody, and I was driving through Northern Virginia last night and going through Mosby territory. You're seeing the signs. Mosby, he's such an important person in that area to this day. But you think back what it was like in the early 1900s when he was really, late 1800s rather, persona non grata.
Yeah, that's exactly how she put it too. He was like, and it's so funny how, like, some people don't know who Mosby, you'd think, would not be known outside of Civil War circles, right? So like when I was talking to my dad, like after we got the cat, he was asking what we called the cat. And I said, oh, we called him Mosby. And my dad said, oh, that's the Confederate Cavalier guy, right? And I was like, I was kind of shocked that he, my dad knows his history, but I was like, whoa, I had no idea he would have known who John Mosby was. And I was like, yeah, the Confederate guy.
I mean, he right, exactly. And he was not a Bloody Bill Anderson type. He wasn't a murderer type. He was a catch you for sport, and mess
Thank
around.
you. Literally
Yeah,
spank you.
yeah, exactly. A
You
Gunnell
know what
House
was
over
funny
there.
was the one picture she had was the walk up to the house, which is where, remember, we're probably on the camera because you, Gentili, and I went up there, and then I
And you
had
whacked me in the ass with a
the
sword.
sword.
I haven't forgot. I've never forgotten
Could
about
you
that, by
imagine
the
the
way.
people looking at because they had a doorbell camera? Could you imagine them looking at that the next day?
There I am, standing there, minding my own business, considering my life when Mary finds a sword and she whacks me in the hindquarters. Really hard, too.
That's great. The meme you made
Had
for that
to.
episode, wasn't it like Mosby sneaking up on Stoughton?
Well, Stoughton had that coming though, but that was the moment when Jeb Stuart, who was the apple of his eye, really noticed him.
Yeah.
And because he Mosby loved himself some Jeb. Loved, loved, loved. I mean, he was, that's how he was. And so he when he captured Stoughton, when he snuck right in under his nose and took him and snuck him back and got him actually out of there.
Yeah.
It's one of the more amazing aspects. If you go down there and you can visit a lot of those places.
That's where he took the charcoal from the fire, right? And he wrote Mosby above the fireplace.
Yeah.
He was
And
just
that's
messing with them.
and if people don't know that story, General Stoughton's in Fairfax. He's staying in a place called the Gunnell House, and it's still there. You can go visit it. I think it's owned by a church now,
It
right?
is,
Right.
yes.
Of all things. And Stoughton's staying in the house, and they're all hunting Mosby because Mosby's a menace. Well, middle of the night, Mosby sneaks right past the Union men personally,
Yeah.
opens the door, walks up the stairs, goes into his bedroom, and wakes up Stoughton. And he says, hey, have you heard of Mosby? And Stoughton goes, yeah, did we finally catch the scoundrel? And he goes, no, he just caught you. And he pulled him out of bed and whacked him in the ass with the sword and said, get up. Then he wrote Mosby in charcoal on the wall and then snuck him out and got him out of there. And it's one of those great intrigue stories of the Civil War, but it's really what made Mosby Mosby. And there's so many times, and he was fascinating because they didn't stay in camp; they stayed in houses. So
Yep.
the Union would, guys like Sheridan would driven crazy by Mosby. They would go trying to find these Mosby Rangers who were tearing everything up and causing all these problems, but they couldn't because they were staying in individual families' homes. They never could find them. But they'd get together and go mess stuff up and then scatter again.
Yeah.
They were like, that's why they call him the Gray Ghost, because they could never find him.
No, he's such a fascinating individual, just especially post-war too. Durant mentions, I read Freeman's books. It's long-winded and Longstreet always foils Lee's perfect plans at the last second.
Well, Douglas Southall Freeman, again, he's one of those cases, and he was a very good writer. He's been gone a long time now, but he fell in love with Lee during the subject. I mean, subject, he did. He read it. If you read those, again, I've never seen an author who really, really got into his characters. He loved Robert Rhodes. He referred to him as a Nordic god in his book. What? That's how he was. He write about these guys and he would just gush over these guys, kind of like you with a IPA, being served by Howard.
Good morning, MJ.
Oh hey, but that's what that was though. So Freeman would he called Rhodes, he called him a Nordic god. I mean, just what the hell, it was random. But he would write these books and really find ways, and he really carried a lot of the water. And again, it doesn't mean he's wrong. It just that was his spin of it. So you had and that's really why we have that real Longstreet versus Lee faction go, because you're trying to determine, okay, what's what. Guys like Bob Crick, guys like Douglas Southall Freeman. You could read all these different authors and get all these different opinions. But at the end of the day, it's just whatever. It's just what you believe in. But yeah, he loved Lee, he loved Rhodes, he loved a lot of these guys, and anybody who went up against Lee, basically the war was lost because Lee was let down. That's how for the most part how he was. He makes a case for it, but again,
I mean, that's the thing is you look at the evidence and it's kind of like I need to finish it. I was listening to the audiobook and I didn't finish it, not that because I was really enjoying it, but it was Gelzo's biography about Robert E. Lee. And I know Gelzo, he takes a lot of criticism for stuff, but he tells,
I
you
saw
know,
him the
some,
other day, by the way. I didn't tell you that.
oh, really?
I saw him at the Gettysburg address thing.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
The Gettysburg Address, like, right, yeah, the thing.
Dedication Day.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, he's a really nice guy, but like, you know, his biography of Lee, he's very, you know, he's talking about stuff that if you hero worship Lee, it's gonna make you not happy. But it's Lee saying the stuff. And that's the type of like that history needs to make people uncomfortable from time to time to challenge what you think and what you believe. Like I've changed my opinion on stuff. You know, I used to really, I was having our friend, that guy Dan that was with us last week at Blue and Gray. He asked me what I thought of McClellan, and I said, I'm like, I like him. And he was really taken back, like he was shocked. He was like, you like McClellan? And I said, yeah, I don't. I said I used to not be a fan of McClellan, but when you look at the historical record and the historical memory of him and what certain authors have done to him, and it just results in this pig piling. And when you look at, again, when you're looking at a source, whether it's primary or secondary, you have to know that the person is going to have bias and what is the agenda. And
well, that's what makes a book
like,
good, though. If you're going to read a book that's just it's like stereo instructions, just tells you what happened. Okay, fine. But again, when you look at some of these guys, look, we know people who have a very rose tinted glasses view on certain people in history, and there's no shame in it. It's just that's the way it is, because they study so much the Freeman concept. They fall in love with their subject. They don't see the flaws. But I mean that's part of the problem, really.
But you can also take it too far the other way, like what has happened to McClellan, where all you see are the flaws, where all you talk about are his flaws, and you make everything his fault. And that's not, you know, you look at Order 191, how for years people believed one thing about that.
And well, of course, look, there are you can make a plus and negative from anybody. Look, he ran against Lincoln. He lost. He said a lot of bad things about Lincoln. He was arrogant. He thought he was the smartest guy. Look, it doesn't take much to realize. You can look at the personal aspect of a guy like McClellan and realize, okay, this guy's kind of a dick, and he is, and he was.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you take that and you delude the successes he had with the military. Yeah. I mean, you can hate this person. I don't know, hate is a strong word. You know what I mean? It's freaking.
I don't like Sheridan, right? But I'll give him credit for the stuff he did.
You can say, okay, there's a problem with I don't like this guy because of this. Well, I mean, okay, fine. But you cannot say that means everything they is done's bad. And we see people, and a lot of it is the Lincoln community people, and I understand that. I mean, Lincoln, you know, he died for our sins for a lot of people, and that's fine that they can think that. So anything that goes against him is going to be blasphemy, and that's where that all comes from. But I mean, the reality was you cannot take away the fact what McClellan did to build the foundation of the Army of the Potomac, because without that, they wouldn't have had the success later on. Meade wouldn't have had the success here. He wouldn't have had the success in the Overland campaign. He wouldn't have had any of that stuff. And if you look at, and you can look at all the other armies. There were 22 Confederate armies. There were 16 Union armies, and you can break through every single one of them. And you can look at the Union armies, and you can look at some of the really good ones: Army of the Tennessee, Army of the Cumberland, Army of the Potomac, all the big boys, Army of the Ohio. And you could say they had strong leaders who had enough to build. But then you could look at ones, okay, Army of the James, for example. You could look at the great Nathaniel Banks, his Red River campaign, disaster. Edmund Kirby Smith gave me the hindquarters on that one, right? But again, because they didn't have that strong foundational army. And that's why the Army of the Potomac had so much success, is because of how much the foundation McClellan built. He wasn't going into this willy-nilly. And that's why they struggled at the beginning. But when you compare the Army of the Potomac with the other armies, and you realize that the ones without strong leadership are the ones who kind of fell apart, and that's common sense. You look at the Department of the Shenandoah, right? Franz Sigel. Oh, I don't know how to say he sucked in German, but if you could figure that out, okay. David Hunter, arrogant fella. equally
Mhm.
sucked. And then you get Phil Sheridan coming into the Valley, who was the third time's a charm. And you know what? You can say what you will about Sheridan, and I get it. He did a lot of bad stuff, but he was, doing the whole total war thing.
Yeah,
But he had it going, and you
yeah.
needed that. And that's sorry to go on a big rant about McClellan, but that's just the reality, you know.
Stella says, I don't want to open a can of worms. Some wonderful author has given me an appreciation of Sickles. We liked Sickles too. And he's
No,
another polarizing figure. And
Sickles, is another one, because again, you tend to focus on the scoundrel aspect, right?
yeah,
And you talk about the whole thing with Barton Key, and you talk about the Queen of Spain, you talk about Mrs. Heimerdinger, all the stuff he did. I mean, the dude was looking for love in all the wrong places. You cannot deny that. Okay, he was. I mean, he certainly was. But and he was a political general. He was one of the only ones here at Gettysburg
yeah,
who was not West Point. And but when you look at Gettysburg, for example, and you look at that left wing, and you look at the orders he had, where Meade tells him basically, you've got your boy Howard, who tells
yeah,
him, send your got corps up here. And he goes, well, I got to keep. So he splits them up. He sends up half of his corps,
yeah,
which was smart. He's watching the left wing, but he sends troops in. But when you talk about the Gettysburg thing, and specifically the whole, my favorite thing about him is he ignored orders, which is
yeah.
just simply not true. And you can spin that all you want. And Hessler's right about this. He absolutely is. He was told to maintain his position. He was told
Yep.
he could move his army with,
Adjust if
right.
necessary.
But there's also the Charles Payne map that
Yep.
and whether or not he was following that or not, it certainly existed, and that's debated about whether he was supposed to be. If you look at the Payne map that was put together the night of the first, his army was supposed to be where they were. Ultimately, where they moved up to
Yeah.
in the Fifth Corps or the Sixth Corps, whoever's going to get there first was going to be on his left, and that was a big part of why he moved there. Also, as of July 2nd, Meade was trying to decide if they were going to be offensive or defensive, or as you say, offensive, right? And so there was a lot. And 5 different times he sent requests back to Meade for
Yeah.
orders, clarification. And again, this isn't a shot on Meade, because he's been in charge 3 days. He's on the
Yeah.
job 3 days. He's trying to figure out what the hell's going on, what Lee's trying to do. And he's got this guy saying, I need to move. What do you think? What do you think? But I think he did not violate orders. He was told, admittedly, yes, move your men up,
Yeah.
but maintain connection with the Second Corps. And he
Because
tried,
Meade was like, I
and,
didn't tell you to go all the way to
and
Richmond.
right, but he tried to do it with artillery, and that's where he got in trouble. But
Yeah.
he wasn't him trying to twist his mustache, trying, how can I
No.
screw Meade today? And I think that's where a lot of people get it from. And I think that's a big part of it. I think, and you could even look back at some of the other people here. Nathaniel Banks is another one who gets ripped on
Yeah.
constantly,
Ed
and
brought
and no,
up
and no one
Banks.
talks about Banks, because why the hell would you? He got pounded in the valley, but he had some success in the Vicksburg campaign,
Yeah.
right? And yes, Red River was a Full Metal Jackets disaster, and it
Yeah.
was, and that was part of that 5-prong attack in 1864, right? That Grant wanted to do with
Yeah.
Overland Campaign, Atlanta, the James River on Atlanta,
Shenandoah.
Shenandoah,
Yeah.
and Red River. Those are the big 5. And so you ended up in a situation where he got passed, but Jackson got the best of him. You're fighting on Jackson's home turf
Yeah.
with a sketchy army. But yeah, but that's the
It's
whole thing,
interesting.
though.
I go back and forth about Jackson, and I'm definitely landing more in the camp now where he was good. He was
No,
really, he
Jack.
had parts of him that are, Jackson was really good. And the thing that, and you made a good point of this, with Chancellorsville, all you hear about is how much the 11th Corps sucked and blah, blah, blah. No one ever talks that was Jackson's greatest moment. Like maybe they just got pantsed. And I think, and I think the reason it falls back on the 11th Corps is no one wants to admit that it doesn't matter who you are. You could be John Reynolds sitting there. You are going to get routed because the position is crappy and you're going against a guy that is, Jackson was good. And yes, he falls into the whole, he dies, after Chancellorsville. And there's this kind of, here, this huge hero worship that you get with Jackson now, but there are parts of him that I really like I'm
Well,
like, this guy was
Jack,
good, but then he's got, Durant says he's literally sleeping on the job in the 7 days.
no, I mean the thing about Jackson again, he died early. He
Yeah.
was martyred, in the Confederate Lost Cause thing. He was Lee's BFF, right?
Yeah.
In the whole deal, he never went against Lee, and that's the whole thing with Jackson. But yeah, Jackson. People don't talk about the 7 days. People don't talk about Kernstown. People don't talk about things like that, but they tend to talk about the Valley. They tend to talk about Chancellorsville, and that's fine. But again, when you're looking at someone like Jackson, he died early,
Yeah.
and he never went against Lee. Conversely, Jeb Stuart and the other one, he died, but he gets blamed by Lee for Gettysburg, so he ends up being the redheaded stepchild again. So he doesn't get that Stonewall deification by a lot of people love themselves from Jeb. You go down to different parts of Virginia,
Yeah.
and it's Jeb, right? But a lot of he's not on that level with Jackson, even though if you're looking at that Mount Rushmore we talked about, he's probably on it, right? I don't think he was the best cavalry commander in the Confederate Army, but I mean
No, I don't think Jeb was.
he gets a lot of the prep. I mean,
I do think in some respects Jeb is very overrated.
well, he's definitely.
Oh yeah,
well,
and he lost his fastball after Gettysburg. Like he's not the same guy that he was before. He's not the same guy he was in the ride around McClellan. When I think of good Confederate cavalry, like my favorite guy has got to be Mosby.
Well, I mean, and that's the whole thing. Look, every single person in the Union Army and Confederates are overrated. Every one of them. I'll tell you this right now, because what I mean by that is nobody is as great as people think they are, and because they all have flaws, and people overrate them. I mean, Grant was the best. He was the best.
Oh,
but
far.
but the thing about it though is you can look at Grant and you can look at a lot of the mistakes he made, right?
Mhm.
Holly Springs notwithstanding. He had his moments. It took him 7 tries to get Vicksburg. 7 tries, but he did it though. And then once he got through that, he was great. But you look at all these people, right? I mean, the Union side, you can go right to Chamberlain, Hancock, overrated. They all are, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, you can look at the big picture, but it doesn't mean they're bad. It just means look at music groups. The Beatles, overrated.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I like the Beatles.
It's
just that people put them in a certain level nobody should be at, right?
Yeah.
But again, but you can say someone's overrated. It doesn't mean you're taking a shot at them. It just means that people are ignoring their flaws and elevating them to a level that they should not be at. And there's not a person in this world, there's not a musician, an athlete, you name it, who you can apply that to. And you can say Jackson's overrated it doesn't mean he sucks. It just means that he's not at the level that a lot of people think he is. And sometimes you can say that and people get all mad and think that you're trying to rip on him, but you're really not.
No.
But
you just have to be able to, I think, like explain yourself. And like for me, and I'm not saying this to, like, Howard had a bad day at Chancellorsville. He made mistakes. But let's also give some credit to Jackson. Like that is that is probably his greatest moment.
No, I will say, I don't interrupt you, but that could be thinking here. You can say people are overrated, but the converse doesn't apply. There are so many underrated folks who don't get the love because the overrated ones overshadow them. Okay. If I'm picking Gibbon versus Hancock, I'm picking Gibbon.
Oh, Gibbon. Yeah. Gibbon's always been.
If I'm picking John Hunt Morgan or Jeb, I'm picking Morgan. Okay. And again, this is not an indictment of anybody else. It just means that a lot of the people are pushed down. If I'm picking Ireland or Chamberlain, I'm going Ireland.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean you're hating on people. It just simply means that a lot of people, like the most underrated general in the Union Army by far is George Thomas. And no one talks about him because he didn't write about his post-war stuff. He burned all his papers. He did his job, but he died young, right? Versus the guys who wrote and wrote and wrote that elevated themselves to a certain level. And again, this is if this is not saying anybody's bad. I'm not trying to say anybody sucks or anything like that. It's just that I think that people build up these people to a certain level. And that's why I don't have a favorite general. I don't. I like the lower guys. I like the colonels and I like the people like that because it's a better story anyway.
Yeah.
But this whole thing started with a question about Freeman. And so he lifted Lee in Jackson, but mostly Lee to a point where he where he thought he was the simply greatest thing in the world. And the
Yeah.
other one who really elevated Stonewall was Henry Kidd Douglas.
Yeah.
I mean, they said he was the most handsome man in the Confederate Army, Mary, Henry Kidd Douglas. But he was a guy who loved Stonewall.
Yeah.
You know, he wrote his I Wrote with Stonewall book, which is a great read. But I mean, it's kind of like being a groupie with the Doors in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it was. He just talked about all the greatest things he did. I mean, you know, but again, that's not doesn't mean bad. It just means that the people
Yeah.
tend to elevate people without looking at the downside, right? And
Yeah.
that's all. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And like, yeah, Estella says, I agree with you, what you're both saying. Jeraine has a question. Didn't DHL say things weren't perfect between Jackson and Lee, and Jackson was looking to get away from him?
Well, that's the whole thing too, is they outgrew each other. They certainly did. But
Yeah.
they were, and the biggest misconception about Stonewall and Lee, and someone said this to me somewhere, was they were of like mind,
Yeah.
which was simply not true. Not even close to being true. And of course, it leads into the whole, well, Stonewall was at Gettysburg, you know,
Yeah.
right? And that's where all went to. But they had their differences. They certainly did. I mean, he was not happy with the way he conducted the valley outside of Winchester, especially with against Nathan Kimball,
Mm-hmm.
right? With that whole thing with Kernstown and all that stuff. So that these guys weren't seeing kumbaya all the time. I mean, they weren't. And although the exception would probably be Sherman and Grant until the post-war when they had their falling out.
Yeah.
These dudes were BFFs big time. I mean, they just loved each other. But that created a really, really strong partnership. But after a while, every partnership isn't going to last.
Yeah.
Whether it be the Beatles, whether it be Belichick and Brady. I mean, you name any aspect in life, eventually you're going to outgrow each other. And that's kind of what was happening, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And like, just looking at some other things here. Wilson is incredibly underrated cavalry commander. His role screening Grant's army crossing the James was perfect and denied Lee the intelligence of that operation.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can look at everything with this.
I don't know much about Wilson as a cavalry commander. Like and that's really like, it's good these other people are talking about them.
No, I mean, you look at, I mean, obviously you're going to look at Union cavalry. You're going to think of guys like Custer, McMurtry, Gregg. Obviously, he'll kill Patrick. Maybe Farnsworth. You're not going to think of Wilson. You're not going to think of Grierson, who's the best of all of them, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But again, that's why you study history, because you learn more about some of these other folks. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, go back to the overrated thing. Doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that sometimes the shadow is so big, it darkens some of these other folks who are probably just as good as they were.
Exactly. I completely agree. And like Ed says, General George Thomas, just as you said, was awesome. Never got real credit.
He wasn't trusted. And that's
he wasn't, because he was Virginia. And that falls on Lincoln and that falls on Grant. But Sherman trusted him immensely. I think more than Grant did. But one who really admired him was Howard. Like, I guess in one letter, Howard's wife asked about Thomas. And Howard just has this glowing thing. Like, he's like, kind of like Howard's talking about, he's like kind of the father figure. He doesn't get enough credit. He's just like, Howard says he was almost as good as Grant. Like, he was this, and Thomas is very respected, and Howard really liked him. And I think Thomas was a really good person too. And it's really sad that I've always said that there needs to be a statue of him in Virginia, but there never will be, because they still don't like him there, you know?
You're not going to see a statue of Thomas. Are you kidding me?
I mean, that would be awesome. But I love the story from, Chattanooga, when they're having to bury the soldiers, and some guy gets on him about, well, we need to put them by state. And Thomas is like, I'm tired of states' rights. Mix them up.
Well, I mean, a lot of speaking of statues, it was like when Carrie the other night at her speech, Janie's thing about Mosby was to talk about the fact that, a lot of the statues are put up to give the finger to different people.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of Mosby statues.
No.
And that's it. Again, it goes back to how they thought. You're not going to build a Mosby statue today. God, you kidding me? There's no way that's going to happen. But I mean, that's kind of the whole thing. But again, that's all these things. You can look at anybody and you can make a case to the greatest thing in the world. And your guy Howard, I mean, he gets that unfortunate rap of Chancellorsville.
Yeah.
And again, when you look at Chancellorsville, it's okay to say Jackson beat his ass because he did. He had more men. He hit the flank. He had the surprise, the whole deal. He won the day. He was a better guy. Same thing with looking at the Franklin campaign, right?
Yep.
Spring Hill.
Yep. Right now, Pat Claiborne and 5 other generals have a week left to live. 160 years ago.
I was gonna. They died a long time ago.
No, but like that. No, I'm talking 160 years ago. They are.
Yep, that's
like,
true.
They have a week left.
What I'm trying to say is people talk about how, well, Hood got pantsed over at Spring Hill. They don't talk about John Schofield actually doing
really well,
doing work that day.
Yeah.
And again, that's what happens. And then as time goes on, it becomes ingrained, into the whole historical narrative, and that's what's fun about it.
Yeah. But then Frank's on here. He just said, "Happy Chattanooga 161." What are you going to say about historical narrative?
Well, I was just saying, then the more time goes on, the more it becomes ingrained. It becomes fact. Mm-hmm. McClellan bad. Rosecrans bad. And things like that. And so you end up in a situation where just time goes on with that. And it's okay. People like what the hell they want to say, but I'm glad, that Estelle had mentioned Jim's book on Sickles, because that's a brave right in this world. It is. Mm-hmm. And because a lot of people aren't. I mean, remember that story Jim told us where someone told him he should be hanged for writing that book at the mine? Why in the world would anything happen at the mine like that, Mary?
That whole thing last Saturday night with the God Rock people and like the tin whistle.
There was some strange.
And poor Ty sitting there like trying to play songs.
there was some strange things afoot at the Circle K that night, but it's always an adventure going there anyway. But be able to write, and in that book is not a book that was simply written just to be the contrarian, but be a pain in the ass.
No.
Everything he writes is legit, and I think a lot of people who really study a guy like Sickles, and not a lot of people do, nothing he wrote was all that earth shattering, but people who don't study him, if they did read it, they'd be like, well, okay, I get it. And it wasn't like he was fanboying about it either. He was calling balls and strikes, which is what he should be doing. But that's the case. There's some other books that have been written about certain people that again is the same concept with that. Some good, some bad. But again, that's why people do history, and why people continue to write books, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing and the other thing too is to always keep reading, even if it's going to challenge your opinion and makes you uncomfortable or you don't agree with it. Just keep reading it. Read the other point of view and find out, why do they have this point of view about this person? Why do they feel this way about it? Etzkorn said December 7th and 8th, the BMI is going to be at the Seminary for Living History, and we'll be going to the Illumination at Antietam. Next big event is Bentonville in March. Yes, so 2 weeks from today is the Illumination in Antietam.
Yeah, that'll be cool. And then there's all the Christmas stuff's going on here at Gettysburg. So if you're in the area, there's a lot of stuff going on again. And that's kind of the big last hurrah into the year, really. Christmas is some stuff going on. But that'll be cool. Illumination in Antietam is great. You just drive through, which is really, really neat. So we'll be definitely taking the ride down to down 15 for that one, because that's a mandatory visit.
Yeah, that'll be cool. So Frank is on here. He said it was good to see us last week. It was awesome to see him too. And Frank also said he met Hester last week, and he told him that because of Hester and the Battle Gettysburg podcast, excellent podcast, by the way, he has a new affinity for Sickles. So that's great when you can do that, when you can start. You don't necessarily have to get someone to change their mind, but if you say, like, you got me thinking about that, Bjorn's on here, Abraham Lincoln Bookshop.
Oh, what's up, Bjorn? What's going on, man? Yeah, you gonna say something?
No, you were.
No, I was just gonna say.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, oh, gee, okay. No, I was just gonna say Bjorn Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago is really cool, and great to see. When I say, yeah, we're getting back into our Saturday routine, Bjorn. We've been running around. We've been busy than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest these last couple of months, and so we are back. We are back. So we'll try to get going with these weekend things again, because it's really, really good.
Geraint asked, have you read JFC's Fuller book on Grant and Lee?
I have not. I have not read that one yet. Nope. There's a lot of good ones to read right now, and that's the one I'm reading right now is that Unholy Traffic book.
Yeah, about slavery.
And we're going to have the author on, Robert K.D. Colby, and he talks about. Put it this way: if you if you're one of these people who doesn't think the Civil War is about slavery, read this book because it is the economics of slavery in the 1840s and 50s and 60s and how it was the bloodline of the South as far as and not just the South, but the North too, for that matter, and how impactful it was. And it's like an economics book, and it's tough to read because it's like a finance book with slavery. But and I say it's tough because there's a lot of tough stories in it. But we'll have him on to talk about it, and it really and it talks about a lot of these big time generals, how they, Jackson had slaves, he owned slaves. Henry King Burgoyne was a big slave family, the 26th North Carolina here at Gettysburg. A lot of them. So it's just a tough read. Joseph Bruin, he was a big slave owner in the South. They talk about how when you had the armies come in, the slave trade was shut down, but also the Union would basically, they would give these plantation owners that I tell you what, we're going to either free your slaves or you can keep your slaves and we're going to take all the crops they make.
Yeah.
So they were no angels either, but it was very interesting read. So that I know, and I thought about Colby because he was on Bjorn's podcast that he did a few months ago. So we're going to have him on to talk about this again. So Bjorn, thanks for reminding me. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Bjorn also says that he's been reading David Powell's first volume on the Atlanta campaign, which I really want to read that one. And he learned that Sickles was a sort of inspector for Halleck. And so Sickles was there for the Atlanta campaign.
Sickles is everywhere. He's
I did not know that. That's so interesting.
He's got an interesting career. I mean, the thing about, you can say a lot of things about Dan Sickles, going back to Sickles again. But the dude was from day one until the end. He made sure that his presence was known. I mean, he just was all the way to the very end. And he's somebody who, again, he gets labeled a certain way because of a lot of his personally. He was not the most virtuous guy you'll ever meet in the face of the earth, to say the least. But I'll tell you, I bet you, no, you can't do this, obviously. If you could measure IQ in the Union Army, top to bottom, he'd be a top 5 as far as IQ.
Yeah, by far.
The dude, if you don't believe me, read his writings. The dude was a genius, absolute genius.
Yeah.
And but he again, speaking of looking for love in all the wrong places, right? That was the problem with him.
It was because of Sickles that we have the Bang Barn.
Yeah, no kidding. Basically marrying the woman he babysat.
Oh God. But that was on that was back when we did Facebook Live. But that's when you were like, can you imagine like waving a handkerchief to go to the old Bang Barn or whatever it was, and that's where it came from.
Can you imagine you're walking by and you're waving? It's just people don't appreciate them. Who says chivalry is dead, Mary?
Yep. Frank said Sickles was one of the few generals that made it to on a film.
Yeah, he lived for a long time. He did.
Yeah, was it 1917?
I don't remember the exact year he died, but he definitely lived for a long time. Yeah. And I went, if you go to Arlington and go to the National Cemetery and you go to visit his grave, it's hilarious because you've got the Civil War section where guys like Frank Wheaton are buried and guys like Phil Kearny are buried. It's a whole section, and then there's Sickles hundreds and hundreds of yards away, all by himself with a regular white granite stone with all the rest of the men, just like at Gettysburg, way ahead of the rest of the Union Army, all by himself. And it's just life imitates art. But yeah, you gotta go find his grave. His grave's a good one.
Doesn't Kearny have a really big grave?
Kearny has he has a really cool grave. That wasn't his first place he was buried. He was finally ultimately put there, but he's got a gorgeous equestrian monument. It's got all these bushes around it, and he's another guy who's underrated. Speaking of underrated, overrated, he died early, and he was a guy who probably would have had big things ahead of him.
Yeah,
but he got shot, he got killed. All his problems are behind him, and that was the end.
I think he eventually would have been commander of the AOP.
It could have been. I mean, we were talking about this, Corps command and everything that he would have played later on.
Yeah.
He was same with Stevens.
Yeah, Hazard Stevens
has being killed. Same battle, Chantilly. So a lot of these dudes, Burbsy McPherson. I drove by his statue in Washington last night. McPherson.
Oh, that's cool.
So but it's interesting, but how they all work with this.
Ryan mentioned Sickles sends a telegram to Lincoln on Resaca and spends a lot of time with Hooker's Corps, but there's not a lot written on his time there.
No, and Hooker was part of. There was that Brat Pack. Remember the Brat Pack with Estevez and all those guys?
Yeah.
It was that same group of people with Hooker and Sickles, Butterfield, that, and you can see how when these whole things kind of played itself out after Meade takes over,
Yeah.
you can see the personal struggles. Do you know how hard it must have been to keep Butterfield on as chief of staff for
Oh
Meade?
God.
I mean,
But he
logically
had
speaking,
to, but he had to.
he had to, but that must have been a tough one. I mean, he had to hold his nose for that. But again, it was the right call. It was, I'm sure he appreciated the work he put in afterwards.
So Ryan says Kearney has one of 2 equestrian statues at Arlington. So there's someone else has an equestrian. Who's the other one that has the equestrian statue at Arlington? Is that Wheeler?
No, Wheeler doesn't have an equestrian. Wheeler just has a regular grave. I remember stumbling upon Joseph Wheeler's grave. He's buried not far, the same area, not far from where Sheridan's buried.
Yeah.
Meigs is
And
buried.
Gibbon's there.
Gibbon, he's buried really close to Gibbon. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court justice, he's buried like right around where she is.
Wow.
And I was looking around like Wheeler, and then he says, people realize because he fought in the Spanish-American War, 1898, that he was able to be buried there. One of the hardest. And speaking of the Atlanta camp, I mean the March of the Sea, one of the better cavalry commanders in the South who doesn't get a lot of the credit. The war child, they call them, Mary, the war child.
Wasn't he like he and Forrest did not like each other, right?
They were rivals. I mean, but again, they both were good at what they did.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Forrest. I mean, he destroyed $6 million in Union supplies and money, and that time's money, while Hood was taken off after the fall of Atlanta.
Well, apparently the march to the sea was 100 million in damage, and that was in those dollars back then. Imagine how much that would be today.
I don't know. It cost $4 billion to fix the Rose Farm, so I guess it's a lot, right?
That whole thing.
I know, I'm just kind of kid, but that's that in real money. That's the damage they did. So that you can see how the guys, the Mosbys of the world, the Morgans of the world, how much they were hunted because the damage they inflicted.
Yeah.
For Forrest, I mean, it's on that what would ultimately be part of the Franklin-Nashville campaign, cost the Union millions and millions by destroying that Western Atlantic Railroad, destroying the supplies. They destroyed a gunboat. They destroyed all the supplies. And that's why we look at the Battle of Allatoona Pass, why John M. Corse is so important, because he saved 1 million rations of food from the Allatoona depot, that Samuel B. French was going to destroy. And that would have put a real crimp in the dick of the Union of Sherman, because he was not living off the land at that point. He still needed supplies. And that would have been a thing. No one really studies John Corse, and that's fine. But that Allatoona Pass which is considered the first battle of the Franklin-Nashville campaign.
Yeah.
But that's how important that was. And again, no one studies that. Nobody.
No one looks at that. And you have to
but it's that bigger picture that sets up, because if Allatoona Pass fall, if French destroys that might be the end of the March of the Sea right there. That might be the end of it, because now he has to go get Hood.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think like Hood was it's evident from the letters I'm reading how much Howard's mentioning him, saying like, we don't know where he is. We don't know what he's doing. And then I think Sherman just had a moment of, you know what? He's not a threat. He's not going to be a threat. Thomas is good where he is, and it's going to be okay. And then I think Sherman knew Hood as an opponent better than Hood knew Sherman as an opponent, if that makes sense. Frank says Allatoona Pass is an understudied battle, and the Union guys are using Henry repeaters there.
I just think what's great about that battle was the fact that you had a guy who was probably 29 years old in Corse, young guy, having the wherewithal to jam 2,000 Union troops, put them on a train in 20 cars, butt to nut, like the subway in Boston on a Friday, right?
Yeah.
And send them up the train tracks to get there just in time before French attacks.
Yeah.
And of course, in John Corse, he got shot in the ear, and he lost 1/3 of his men. He famously said, "I lost 1/3 of my men and 1/3 of my ear." That was a quote he said. But he survived. He survived the war too. But he's a very, very underrated. You want to talk about heroes in the Union Army, especially between Atlanta and Franklin, or the Atlanta March of the Sea. Because I'll tell you right now, Allatoona Falls, there's probably no March of the Sea. That's how impactful that was. We talk about the little battles leading to big things. That's a perfect example. Perfect as Allatoona. Perfect.
Yeah. So where is Hood at this point, 160 years ago? Is he getting close to Spring Hill, Franklin area?
Yeah, probably.
I
He's
would
probably,
love to be there for the anniversary next week.
yeah. I mean, they probably would have just got beaten over the river by Schofield's,
Yeah.
right? They would have seen Schofield sail away as he gave him the finger and waved as he kept
Bye.
going. And so yeah, probably. But you're right. Franklin 160 is going to be a good one. I hope a lot of people. Didn't Frank say he was going?
Frank's going to it. Yeah.
How the hell does he go on all these trips? He's a Los Angeles guy. Good for
He
him.
just does. No, he's a traveler. He knows his stuff about the war. Like talking to him, it's like, holy, like he knows a lot. And that's so cool. He's going there and said we had wanted to, but we couldn't make it work, unfortunately. So we will get to Franklin at some point. But yeah, like you know, and like for me, it's the whole like just at 4:30 next Saturday is like when the battle starts. That's kind of when because it's at dusk, right?
Well, fourth, yeah, we dust, light snow would be falling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope they do a good job. I'm sure they will. I mean, Franklin is it's not a, it's not Antietam, it's not Chancellorsville, it's not Gettysburg, but I think they'll do a good job. But 160 is a big one, and I think and again, people don't study that battle like they should, and
No.
people understand the carnage of it, and some
Mhm.
people, but that's the thing,
Yep,
You
it's
just
a very horrific battle. It's very, you know, and I think like it's one of those ones where I've heard you go to it and it's like going to Andersonville, it changes you. Like you walk into that building where you can still see the bullet holes and you come away from it like having this whole other feeling about the war and all that. But I think like the loss there on, for the Confederates is terrible. Like the morale must have just gone completely down because, you're losing Claiborne, who was he already was a rising star.
Yeah,
And
some
men,
of our Franklin friends say there's all this besides Claiborne, Mary, who died.
um,
So bad.
but like, I mean, I think though that, yes, I like maybe he gets talked about too much, but he was good. Like that's the thing is you study Claiborne and he is good. Like really good. And he improves with everything. And he's not West Point educated. He's in the British Army, originally, immigrates here in what is it, 1840s or 1850s? He immigrates.
1840s.
Yeah,
Right?
and he's got to he tries to hide his accent because the Irish are not well respected.
He goes to godforsaken Ohio.
Yep,
You know,
leaves, shockingly.
leaves. I mean, typical Ohio. They basically kick him out of the. They didn't kick him out of the
Yeah,
state. He got a
Yep.
job offer, but he couldn't get into pharmacy school because he didn't speak Latin. So he ultimately ended up taking a job in Arkansas down there, and the rest is history. So one of those close misses that he could have been. I don't know. I'll be curious how he would have turned himself out.
Yeah,
They
I
probably,
don't know. Like, and it makes me wonder if if he was going to be for Reconstruction, would he have been able to rally men with him like Hiram Granberry had Hiram Granberry lived? That was one story I was telling people last week was, I would show them the picture of Granberry and I would say, he's like the kid that didn't brush his hair, And then I told them the story of why that picture was taken, that it was taken to give to his wife who was dying of cancer.
Mhm.
And when you read of Hiram Granberry, how he was after he got back after her death, that his men said he was never the same. And he just put everything into fighting in the war. He's killed at Franklin quite horrifically, bullets right through the eye.
Yeah.
Didn't they find him like on his knees still with his hands like to his face?
That's the story. I mean, again, you're talking about a lot of that's how they said he was down. They didn't find him that way.
Yeah, but that's when he went down like
they
that.
said they saw him down like that, and then when they found his body later on, he was laid out. But but that's the thing. It's again, people could talk about Franklin, talk about the unnecessary deaths of it and things like that. But it's too bad that Claiborne didn't emigrate into either Boston or New York City, because he might have ended up in the Irish Brigade. And how that could have played itself out.
He would have been such a
maybe he could have been like Meager, Mary, like you say.
Mar.
But no, but those are the great what ifs about history,
Yeah. But he's definitely one that, I don't know, I really enjoy studying him. And I really enjoy studying his, like the commanders he had with him, his subordinates. Like I know a little bit more than I used to about Hiram Granbury, but the next one I want to study is Lucius Polk, because he was another one that was, when the Union guys saw Claiborne and his guys, that you're going up against kind of the steel of the army at that point, like Pickett's Mill, right? That's who they were.
Yeah, well, I mean, at that point, they were all battle tests. I mean,
Yeah.
we were talking about 1864, about the changing dynamic of the war, where they realized that these Napoleonic styles of fighting was not equal to the modern weaponry at the time.
Yeah.
Your mass, your fire, and all that stuff. And by 64, it was all, all bets are off. And so as soon as Grant started his that 5-prong attack thing, it became more and more and more vicious. But up to even because that Atlanta campaign, when you look at all the battles that took place, Dallas and Cold Farm and Resaca and all that, so you can even take it back to Ringgold if you really think about it. They just, it's a different style of warfare, and how you adapted to it depended on how you fought. I mean, sure, I think Sherman's Atlanta campaign is way more impressive than the March of the Sea is.
Oh, and Sherman thought that as well. The March was just simply moving operations for him, and he was more concerned about being in the Carolinas. Durant brings up an interesting point. Claiborne was Protestant and the Irish Brigade was Catholic, so
they weren't all Catholic.
They were all Catholic.
They were all Catholic. I mean, they were mostly Catholic, but they were definitely. I mean, the 29th Massachusetts was Protestant. So I mean, you didn't have all of them. They eventually got pushed out. 28th Mass came in, the Fahabala guys, but yeah, he could have found a home there. But I think if anything, he would have ended up in the North, and he would have been a little more politically minded, right?
He's very influenced by the politics, and he doesn't understand. He doesn't. And I've tried to say this to people, and people have been like, "That's not true. He knew what the South was fighting for." No, Claiborne did not understand the causes of the war. I mean, we're talking about a guy who in January of, was it 64? Didn't he sit everywhere? Was it? Yes, 64. Sits everybody down at the table and is like, "So I know how we can win this." And he introduces his emancipation, and Shot Pouch Walker is there, and he's like, "Nope, we're not doing that." Like, and he and his mother both owned a lot of slaves. So Shot Pouch, after that, he goes to Claiborne and he's like, "I think what you're doing is wrong. And guess what? I'm going to get your thing and I'm going to take it to Richmond, and you're going to be in a lot of trouble." And Claiborne's like, "Yes, take it to Richmond. I want them to know about it."
Yeah, well, Shot Pouch was a different type of fellow.
Oh my God, he's a very angry individual. But you can just imagine how that meeting went, where they're like, "No, this is."
Oh, I think there was that quote that someone said, I'm blanking who it was, basically saying, "Then what are we fighting this for? If this is what we're doing." But I think at that point, and that was a good kind of psychological insight into the philosophy and minds of Patrick Claiborne.
Yeah.
Just like Sherman, for example, all he wanted to do was win the war. He didn't care if we're going to win independence. Here's how we have to do it, in my mind. But again, he hit the glass ceiling with that too, and so you can't have it both ways, because again, when you look at the slave economy in the South, if you're going to do that, you may win independence, but you're going to have no economy. That's what they were saying, and it's. But he was right though. He was definitely ahead of his time with that, and they kind of came around towards the very, very, very end. About that, it was way too late. But if they took that advice, it's tough to say what would have happened. But that's why he would have been a great Yankee. He would have been.
Oh, he would have been, because he was so coming from Ireland, and you can see how the Irish that were in the North were influenced by the politics in the North. You can imagine that Claiborne would have been much the same way. And Claiborne, his whole thing, this is what I love about his story, is he's always searching for his home, and he finds it. And that's what he's fighting for, is his home. And he's not understanding of the economy or the politics in the South as someone who has lived there his entire life.
Yeah.
Like that. And that's what's interesting about his story. And he's just, and he's a guy that, like, after he meets Sue Tarleton, apparently he changes. He used to be kind of grumpy and quiet, and he meets Sue and there's a change in him. He's joking around more with his.
So usually guys are happy to meet the girl and they get grumpy. That's usually how that goes. He's obviously the exception of the rule. So good for him with that. It must have been the Irish Catholic thing.
He's Protestant.
No, I was thinking of Clay. What's his name? Claiborne still. No, I'm about Granbury. No, no, Claiborne. Yeah, definitely talk about. My mind's all over the place all of a sudden. But no, but he was a guy who knew how to fight. He had his crappy moments too.
Oh, he
You know,
absolutely he did. He
know,
definitely like he had moments that were not good. Shiloh is not a great day for him.
mhm.
There's parts of the Atlanta campaign that are not great, but there's parts of there's parts of Chattanooga, Chickamauga that are not good, but there's parts of Chattanooga, Chickamauga that are like
Yeah.
Ringgold Gap. That is brilliant what he does there. And
No,
we've been there. Like you
no,
can see
no, he's no, he,
how he
no,
did it.
no, no, no doubt. He's really, really good. But if you want to be the contrarian, there's always something. There's always some people who have their moments. But no, he's we've talked a lot about him. We've a lot about Claiborne.
Yeah.
Not just and a lot not just because of Franklin, but just about his other stuff he did.
Mhm.
That the Stonewall the West book.
Yeah. Which is
Fantastic.
very, very, very good book. One of the only biographies about him. There's also a graphic novel, which I know Frank and I have talked about that before. It's a little lost causey, like, but the artwork in it is amazing. It's brilliant. Like it's beautiful. I mean, I love graphic novels. Often they're really great stories, but the artwork is beautiful in them. And it's got some very graphic depictions of the Battle of Franklin that like if you're not into that, don't read it because they're very graphic.
Well, Frank, if you go there, make sure you post a lot of pictures on your social media.
Yeah, he
Because
said he's gonna post a lot of pictures, send us some pictures too.
go find the Pizza Hut. That's probably gone now, isn't it?
The
Isn't the
Pizza
Pizza Hut
Hut.
gone?
Let us know if you see the Ghost of Claiborne because he apparently appears on the anniversary. That's the one story I told him on our Halloween episode.
Oh, that's right.
That was the anniversary where the guy was out talking to this man on the horse dressed in a Confederate uniform. And the guy was really in character, and the guy, the person talking to him was super impressed. And then all of a sudden he goes, well, Govern, if we are to die today, let us die like men. And the guy's like, and the guy rides off on the horse and disappears. And so the guy goes in and tells the people, and they're like, oh, you just met, that happens here. Now, there are some that say it doesn't, but.
Well, you know what? Again, you take that with a grain of salt. Again, it's that's not a polarizing concept with that whole thing. But again, it's enjoy it for what it is. Learn the history if you could, at least, if anything, whether that happened or not, that story you just told. The guy got the quote right. So.
Yeah, and he said he thought the person was very much in character, like almost like, wow, this guy's really into this. And then he said, well, Govern, if we were to die today, let us die like men. And he's like, woo, off he goes.
Oh, no question. He probably, killed right outside of that Pizza Hut. His last words are probably, I learned it from the pizza man. That's probably what I learned, But that's
oh my God. Some good comments and questions here. Frank's like, ask Claiborne how the checkers game went, because that's the thing he did when he played checkers when he got there. He, I think, drew it on the ground and they played checkers, it's kind of sad when you think about it. You've got maybe a couple hours to live, and like, obviously he was trying to probably just get his mind off things. Frank also mentions that the Lots house in Franklin, there's a display with Claiborne's signature.
Oh, yeah.
There. That's the one that's not owned by Battle of Franklin Trust, right?
Lots house, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of good ghost stories from there.
Yeah, Boft doesn't own that one. I'm pretty sure it's a Loft House. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. I'm 99% sure it's the Loft House, which one it was. So,
Miranda's dying at your pizza man comment.
I learned it from the pizza man.
If the pizza man truly loves. Actually, Geraint's got a question. Do you guys know any good books on the naval war of the Civil War?
Oh, God.
Where's Leonard when you need him?
And Bjorn, too.
Yeah.
I will say it depends on the Lion and the Fox is a good one, and so that's the one by Alexander Rose, the guy who wrote the TV show Turn, the Rev War one. It's not. It's. I guess it is Navy. It's Blue Waters. It's about the blockade from Liverpool, building the ships to run the blockades with the pirates, to get to Cuba and then to the Confederate blockades to the ports. That's my favorite one, because it's a great read. It talks a lot about that. how much influential England was for the South because of how they relied on the cotton and how they kind of behind the scenes tried to manipulate a lot of different things. It's Navy because they talk about the Union. They had spies in Liverpool to try to find the fact of building warships. And it talks about the warfare that took place between the Union, the ironclads, and the wooden boats against these blockade running boats. That's a good one. It's called Lion and the Fox by Alexander Rose. That's my favorite one.
Excellent book. I just wrote it in the chat for people to see that.
Because it reads like a spy novel.
Yeah, he's such a good author. He's a really nice guy too.
Real heavy British accent, right?
Which is because he was educated over there.
Yeah.
But he's American. But he's got the
he has British
accent. Richard, I think he's mentioning Uttermost Ends of the Earth, I think is another one. And Last Flag Down.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of good ones, but again, that's what comes to my mind right off the top of my head because it just reads like a spy novel, and he's a good writer. If you dig through, I think we did an episode with him, didn't we?
He's episode 100, I think.
Okay, we did. So go back in the Wayback Machine and find that episode, and you can hear him talk about it. But he does that TV show Turn, which I've never seen, by the way.
Oh, it's such a good show.
I heard it's a little dry.
It takes a few episodes to get into, but then once you get into it, it's really good. It's kind of like Mad Men was that way for me too. Like it took me a couple to get into it, and then I was like, oh, I love Mad Men. But Turn is really, really good. I need to read the book. And Frank confirmed Lots is not owned by Bach. They've tried to buy it, but they don't want to. They do ghost tours there, but they also do the history as well. And I think it's really well done. But that's cool about the Claiborne signature.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. But there's a lot of good stuff there. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books you can read on these things. But you obviously you limit. You can only do so much. But check out that one. Check out Rose's book. I think you'll like that. I know you'll like that. I think you'll like that.
It's very, very good. And he's got a really good, if you just Google Alexander Rose, he's got a really good newsletter he sometimes puts out just about different spy stuff. It's really interesting.
Yeah, his book is really about the intrigue, about spies, about pirates. I mean, how can anybody not like that? I mean, and it's very, very, very well written. And it's written like a novel. But so I would definitely check that one out.
Durant said he didn't like Turn, but I think that might be because he's British. Maria, hey Maria, she said Turn's amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine a British guy not liking Turn. It's a shocker, But that's
Simcoe.
I should watch that. We should watch that one of these times.
Yeah, we just need to get an AMC subscription.
It's on somewhere. It's probably on YouTube or some damn thing. But no, we'll definitely check that out at some point. But that's definitely the book I would suggest. No question about it.
Yeah. Richard mentions Lion and the Fox also connects to Teddy Roosevelt. His favorite uncle was a Confederate agent in Liverpool.
Yeah. It's definitely an eye opener because you don't think about that. How England is basically building blockade running ships and warships of the Confederacy covertly, kind of like Area 51 type thing. They're hiding it, and the Union has spies trying to sniff them out and find them. And the intrigue that goes back and forth. And the Lion is the Union spy, and the Fox is the Confederate guy who's paying the boats to get built. And it's just a fascinating study. And and then they talk about a lot of the maritime attacks, the battles and stuff that took place in the two. Everybody likes pirates, man. Captain Jack Sparrow.
I was watching Pirates last night when you got home.
Yeah.
I love that movie so much. It's such a good movie.
Yeah, that's definitely a good movie, no question.
Yeah, the ride's amazing too. Magic Kingdom. Okay. Love Magic Kingdom. But yeah, then speaking of books, there's so many good books out there just to read. And there's constantly new books about the Civil War coming out as well, it's great that it's still being written about. I know we have one to read about the March to the Sea, which looks at it from kind of the emancipation perspective, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean that whole thing is fascinating too. We talked before about how much they wanted to focus on speed, right? to
And
try to
like,
get, and then you've got these slaves following them, and then Grant Sherman's like, well, if they can move, they can join us, but
yeah,
we basically ain't feeding them. What are we gonna
yeah.
do?
And then you have Ebenezer Creek happen.
And that's a tough story. That even pissed off the powers that be in Washington.
Yeah,
Stanton had to come down from the principal's office and question Sherman about that. And he's like,
not my fault. It's Jeff C. Davis. You guys let us
David,
go.
that Davis is an a-hole. You know him, you know?
And I gotta wonder, like, they tried to spin it that it's like, oh, we couldn't, but I think Davis was Davis. Like, he lived up to his name in more ways than one with his politics, you know. Oh, Durant mentions Amanda Foreman's World on Fire is another one.
Mhm.
Weird.
I mean, that's the great thing about this field is there's so much stuff you can read about. It's just everywhere you can read. It just, and I don't think I've ever not been reading for years. There's always something. There's always something to read. You know what I mean? Hopefully it's these books continue. I think they will be. I think they
Yeah.
absolutely will.
Richard just asked if anybody read and have thoughts on the Vanquished. I think,
On
yeah, it's about Mosby's Men. I have not read it. I want to, though.
No, that's definitely one of the top bucket list books is that one.
We've heard good things about it, though.
No, and did Carrie mention that? Did she mention that book
No,
the other day?
John did. Gentile's read it, I think.
Okay, yeah, I knew somebody this past week was mentioning that book. That I thought it was in her presentation. Um, but yeah, but this, I mean, Mosby is just an incredible. If you go to places like Front Royal, Virginia, and places like Fairfax, you go to get into the deep Mosby muck, the history, Farquhar County, places like that. It's amazing to see some of the stuff, and he's one of those dudes. Again, you can like the Confederacy, you can hate the Confederacy, but you can it doesn't matter. It's if you can look at the individuals and appreciate just the balls of some of these
Oh,
things.
yeah.
How this dude got in his horse carrying those gigantic bowling balls he carried around with his business beyond me, because the guy, and he wasn't a killer, he wasn't a murderer,
No.
he was not some. I mean, again, yes, he killed some of Sheridan's guys, and there was a lot of stuff that went on that got ugly with Sheridan, and they did back and forth stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, for the most part, it was just about destroying stuff and causing problems. So he was no angel, but again, he was not Bloody Bill Anderson either. He was not that. He was not one of these bushwhacker dudes,
No. Here, you'll like this comment, and you can tell the story. So Ryan said, just think about how many soldiers are carrying Enfields made down the road from where I'm sat now. Never mind Whitworth rifles, pistols, and cannons. You need to tell the story about what you carried in the Remembrance Parade.
Oh, I was like, what the hell are you going with this one?
Yeah, because he lives down the street from down the road from where the Enfields were built.
So right, I actually have an authentic 1853 Enfield tower that was used here at Gettysburg that I got years ago, and I actually carried it in the parade. And so I carried an authentic Enfield, probably made around the corner from you. It probably had some whiskey spills on it, probably from your, from say St. Patty's Day 2020, probably still on there. But that was but I have that, so I got to walk around with that. So it was pretty cool that I got to march in a parade carrying an actual weapon that was used in the battle. That was pretty cool.
Yeah,
and it's cool. Heavy as friggin' house. Yeah, heavy as hell.
Oh yeah, it's tall too. It's as tall as I am.
Well, all those long guns are big, but they're definitely why they change positions, and the captains will call out the orders, because it's a heavy thing to carry.
So Jeffrey asks, what makes you decide to read a book versus getting the audiobook? Trying to find that balance as my list is ever growing. For me, it's my commute to work. I drive an hour each way. So and I listen to them at 2 times the speed, which sounds kind of crazy, but your brain within 5 minutes is used to it. And you can never go back to listening at normal speed. You realize how slow they're read. So it depends if I can get it. I actually listen to a lot more fiction audiobooks because I prefer reading the nonfiction. But if I can find them, I will listen to them.
I've never read an audiobook. I never heard an audiobook. I've only read. I've never, and I never, not like I'm some conscious objector to doing it. I just, you know what? I like to be able to grab a book, and I like to open it up and smell the page. I'm weird like that. I just like the actual physical book. I've never ever heard an audiobook. I never have.
I was not into them until I started commuting. And I will say this, like, check your local library too for audiobooks, because if they have like Libby or Cloud Library, that is an excellent resource for audiobooks. That's actually where I do listen to a lot of them. And Audible is an option too. I've listened to Jeff Shar's books on audio, and they're the narrator for them for the Western Theater books, like Smoke at Dawn. He's excellent. The guy that narrates that. Oh, Bjorn's back. The customer's gone. He's wondering what we're up to now.
Same thing. Nerding out.
Yeah.
But it's just about books. You tend to come on and the conversation tends to spitting to books. And no, I think there's a value. I've watched like YouTube art lectures and stuff like that. And we've watched obviously live lectures a million times. But yeah, as far as the books go, I don't know. I like to read.
Yeah, I do too. And just another shout out for Bjorn and Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. Check them out on Facebook because they do amazing live streams with authors. Just talking to them. They're about an hour long. And he's got like an amazing store there. So check out their website too. They do ship as well. But he gets all the new Civil War books, and his place is like a museum. Like, it's not just books.
I enjoyed my visit there a couple summers ago. That's a cool little place. It's good because you can see authentic stuff and you see signatures and all these first edition stuff. So yeah, I know Frank's been there. I've been there. You haven't been there.
I have not.
You're living vicariously through me.
I know.
And Frank for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you videoed with me when you were there. So I did get to see some stuff. I know we have a friend, Amanda, who lives in Chicago, and I keep meaning to tell her, get down to that bookstore.
Amanda has not been to his bookstore?
I don't think she has. I was going to tell her, get down there.
Well, we're going to have a talk with her.
Yeah. I don't think she has.
I mean, she lives by Wrigley, so she's not too far away. That's an easy Uber ride.
Yeah, she'd love it because she's a Civil War nerd.
Yeah, we're going to talk with her. She's in the doghouse now.
Amanda's awesome.
She's coming down here in a few weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We should get ready to jump off. It's already 11:45.
Yeah. And Durant just mentioned there's some good books on Fenian invasions of Canada after the U.S. Yeah, I need to find some of those.
We go.
Yeah, that was no, but that's such a fun story.
It is. I know. Hey, they're still afraid of the Fenians up there. Every time there's a strange ship shows up in the harbor, one of those lakes, the Fenians.
Well, the story was, so my hometown is right on Lake Huron, where I grew up. And there's cannons from War of 1812, and they're spaced overlooking the lake. And one day, I think I was 4 or 5 years old, and I asked my grandma, I'm like, what are those cannons there for? And she's like, just very seriously, those are to keep the Fenians out. And I'm like, who are the Fenians? And she told me about the Fenians. And I was like, wow. And so I grew up believing that that's why they were there. And she's like, if they ever come across the lake, we can fire these cannons at them. I'm like, oh my gosh.
You guys are violent people up there.
Yeah. Estella's just wondering how to find. So Estella, if you just search on Facebook for Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. Yeah. Frank, I never did get the bio. Yeah, I still need to get the bio. I still need a physical Oliver O. Howard bio because I don't have one. I had to return the one to the library that I had. I don't have it. Are you busy?
You don't? You don't have?
I had to return it to Plymouth Library.
Oh, that's right.
Yep. But yeah, for Estella and anyone else, if you just search on Facebook for Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, their Facebook page should come up for you. When they do awesome live streams as well, just search on Google for Abraham Lincoln Bookshop and their website will come up. And they've got some really great stuff. They got new books. They got it's like a museum, right?
It is a museum. It's actually a really cool museum. No question. Yeah. Nice.
Well, we should jump off here now.
No, we do. It's almost time to get disappointed by college football at noon. Story of my life. But anyway, so we are going to be recording the episode on the preamble to the March to the Sea, which is going to be the set up to it. So we're not going to talk about the actual march. We're going to get to the point right when they're about to get a step in, and we'll stop there. But it's fascinating to talk about the intrigue that took place between Atlanta and when they actually went, because it was not the slam dunk that I think a lot of people.
No, they're not just sitting there. They're wondering, what is John Bell Hood up to? And then he's like, that thing you put on my Facebook last night with Dick Roman with the
Oh yeah.
Nashville sounds like a good idea.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I mean, where Hood, Hood was angry. He was very upset about the citizens being told to GTFO out of the city, and they knew that he was going to do whatever he could. And you're Sherman, you're isolated. You're the first of the five to succeed in your mission, and you're sitting up there on an island. And you talk about Napoleon 1812 going into Russia, right? And now you're all by yourself. Okay, we did what we are supposed to do. Now what? I want to go to Savannah. There's no point sticking around here. I've got one supply line, the Western Atlantic Railroad, going back to Chattanooga to Nashville. They cut this. I'm freaking screwed. I don't want to sit around. And then it turns into Hood to do whatever he could to move him further away from Atlanta.
Yeah.
He leaves Slocum and his 12,000 men in the city, and he forces Sherman to go on a fun run to chase him. And it wasn't really until early November when Grant finally got sick of him complaining about it.
Yep.
And
it was November, I think it was like November 8th or 9th that he got the official word.
But he got dragged all the way into Alabama. I mean, he got pulled. I mean, Hood drew him, and that wasn't the whole point. He wanted to move out because he wanted to get to Nashville. He wanted to destroy that. That's why cut the rail when you can go take out the mother lode, go to Nashville. Yeah. That was the whole thing. And Grant's like, your primary goal isn't going to the beach in Savannah. Your primary goal is getting Hood. Mm-hmm. And Hood kept moving away and away and away. He kept chasing and chasing and chasing. And finally, he got his wish. And he got back to Atlanta, and then he set up, and he took off, burnt the city, and took off.
Yep.
And away we go.
Bye-bye.
And that city would stay sane until Tom Brady destroyed it in 2017. God. The rest is history. Anyway.
Well, everyone, thank you for joining us for this silly little thing we do. We're sorry we had a bit of an absence. We will not be back here next weekend, unfortunately.
We're back to our regular schedule, except next week.
Not next weekend.
Well, I know. I'm shipping up to Boston next weekend, so I got to head to the city next week.
Oh, hey, Vicky.
Oh, hey, Vicky. We ran into Vicky at the museum that day, remember? Yeah, so it's good to see her on here. Just as we're jumping off, unfortunately, but you can go back and rewatch this, I suppose.
Yeah. But yeah, we will try and maybe we'll do an evening one or something at some point. Like not this week because it's Thanksgiving. So everyone who celebrates Thanksgiving, have a happy Thanksgiving, and everyone else, hope you have a good day at work on Thursday.
No, he definitely. So we'll talk to you all soon. So we will do this again soon. We'll drop our episode. We'll definitely schedule. We got to do a book club too. We got that coming up, and we'll do a live here. What do you call it? Roundtable pretty soon. So all right, so off we go. And we have a great weekend. We'll talk to you all soon.
Okay, see you.